This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
Welcome. Time for Inside the Paint on the eve of the NBA draft. And I think tomorrow night is going to be extremely active. Wouldn't surprise me one bit if the Miami Heat are involved in some of that. And Iris, we'll get to that in a little bit, but I want to start with what Big O kicked off the show with us, and that's the PJ Tucker situation. And so kind of take us through the mechanisms here. Why would PJ Tucker opt out? And is there a way that this could potentially benefit the Heat in the short term? We understand the long term with the leverage play, but is there a way that since he opted out, they can time this thing and potentially add another piece to help out the roster?
There's a couple of factors at play. The most basic factor at play is you can always get a raise like in life in the NBA the next year in your contract if you opt out. So PJ Tucker can opt out of $7.3 million and just come back for $8.4 million because of what they call the non-bird exception. You can usually build such a contract for more than 3 years. However, the NBA has what they call an over 38 rule. It used to be over 36 rule. We've all aged up in life, so they moved it to the over 38. Basically, it means if you go beyond a 3-year contract, sort of like the NFL, the money gets averaged back into your salary cap. So in other words, if you were to give PJ Tucker a 4-year deal or a 5-year deal, those years will be averaged into the first 3, making it a difficult salary cap hit. So what you have is the option of this, is you can bring PJ back on a 1-year deal at $8.4 million, 2-year deal at about $17 million, 3-year deal at about $27 million. You get the progressive raises there. So it behooves PJ, who had a very good season, and had to sign below market last summer because Milwaukee didn't want to go into the tax, didn't want to wind up in the stratosphere like the Warriors let him go, even after he helped them win the NBA championship in 21. So the Heat can now give him more. PJ can now get more. The question is, do you want to be paying a 40-year-old NBA power forward over $10 million 3 years out? Yes, PJ keeps himself in great shape, but age has a way at 40 years old of changing you. I mean, look, Udonis Haslem was 40 years old 2 years ago and wasn't even a factor for the Miami Heat when they were paying him. The timing doesn't matter as much, Clay, for this reason. The Heat are going to be above the salary cap anyway. The Heat probably will be or close to being a luxury tax team on the apron or close to that. The only question comes in, will the Heat be a hard cap team? And if you were a hard cap team, it means everything together. You can't go over $155 million in your payroll. That's where a little bit extra could become problematic when you're trying to bring back a Caleb Martin, if you're trying to bring back a Victor Oladipo, or if you suffer a devastating injury and get an NBA salary cap exception to bring in another player. If you're hard cap, the league might say, God forbid, Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry out for the season. Here's an additional, it'd probably be around $8, $9, maybe $10 million for another player. If you're hard capped and you're right at that 155, you can't spend the extra money. So it all sort of factors into the way you want to handle your offseason. And again, you prioritize. Most important player, Jimmy Butler. Second most important player, Bam Adebayo. Arguably, we can go back and forth. I'm going to say third most important player, Tyler Hero. Maybe number 4, Kyle Lowry. But then you're getting into the PJ Tucker area. Well, in the NBA, if a guy is your number 5 or your number 6, he's an important player and therefore becomes a prioritized player regardless of his age.
Make sure to drop your questions, your comments, and I know there are a lot of rumors out there, and feel free to drop whichever ones you have heard, and we'll get to them along the way. The thing with PJ Tucker is, we're kind of putting him in this age category, and yet he didn't look like
Correct.
a 37-year-old during the season. So it does make you wonder if there's a way that, does his game potentially age better? Does he age better? And there are certain people like Tom Brady who, because of the work that they put in on their body, because I'm sure of some level of genetics, maybe it's all the energy drinks that PJ Tucker drinks, whatever it is.
LeBron's another one of those players. And just to interject, and I've said this many times on our Slomin's Home Security Inside the Paint show over the last few weeks, I felt that PJ Tucker is 37 going on 32. And Kyle Lowry is 36 going on 40. So it depends where you're trending. But the reality is the older you get, even with the best body, injuries become more of a threat and more of a risk. They just do. No matter the plyometrics you do, if you're Tom Brady, no matter everything LeBron does relentlessly in the offseason. We've seen this with LeBron, Clay, in the last 2 years or so, a little bit more of those ticky-tack, knick-knack injuries that do add up. So, yes,
that's true.
PJ Tucker might meet the Heat requirement as the best conditioned, toughest, meanest 37-year-old in the NBA, but he's still a 37-year-old, and you're still talking a 3-year contract. And honestly, except for the last few years, no one would ever have thought about extending any level of quality money to a 40-year-old NBA player, right?
Well, of course not. Of course not. Let me ask you this. So this would be the 3-year full mid-level, correct?
No. This would be 3 years not built on the mid-level. They could do that also.
Not built on the mid-level.
This would be 3 years built on his non-bird exception. The money would be so negligible to give him the mid-level that you probably could work beyond without it and preserve that. Simply by telling PJ, do you want better players around you? Do you want Caleb Martin? Do you want Victor Oladipo?
Right.
Do you want free agent X? So you can do the 3-year, $27 million deal I just mentioned with PJ Tucker without touching a single exception. Yes, Philly might be able to trump it with 330, but honestly, you're getting back into the state income tax. And the fact is that PJ is not living here. He's living back home in Texas, went to University of Texas, has a place in Houston, another non-state income tax. So honestly, the Heat's 327 probably financially trumps the 76ers 3-year 30 if they can move Tybal.
Plus, it's so worth it if you're sitting there doing your TurboTax. Like, you don't have to go through the
whole other table.
Probably has its own. By the way, as I said, make sure to drop your questions. There was a good one I want to get to in a second. I know we're kind of getting into the weeds here, but I do think that these are things that are kind of important. So, the NBA salary cap. Do we have a projection like in 3 years? And the reason why I'm asking this is, we're coming off the COVID year a couple of years ago, and we know it's like a ramp up to get back to where we probably should have been relative to the salary cap and the average of it. So is there a world where in 3 years we're looking back at this contract potentially and it's like, oh, well, it seemed crazy at the time, but the cap goes up X amount, and it doesn't seem quite as crazy.
Yes, percentage-wise, it wouldn't. There's a couple of factors in play. Also, 3 years out after the next 2 seasons, Kyle Lowry's money disappears off your books. Right, now, I don't know if they're going to bring him back or not, but Clay, I will say this. Jimmy Butler's going to get into the $50 million single-year salary range. You have Bam Adebayo's extension. You likely will have a Tyler Hero extension. You possibly will bring in a mid-level player for at least 3 years who will go out to $14 million or so that year. And can you get rid of Duncan Robinson? I think the Heat's view, short-term for sure, I even think long-term, is this will be a above the salary cap team. So to your question, would an extra $10 million to PJ Tucker put the Heat in a bad place? Outside chance, yes. If Tyler's not re-signed and they go with a cheaper version and send him out for an expiring contract, some of the possibilities we mentioned where you trade Tyler, you bring in a Jeremy Grant for 2 years and that money's off the books also. So it really matters to this. The Heat have been very good at saying we are going to have our off seasons of decision for cap. We know that they did that in 2010 when they got Bosh and LeBron to join Dwayne Wade. We know they did that in the Kyle Lowry offseason when they said, we'll get our books in order, we'll be below the cap, be able to make a Lowry deal. So the Heat could be looking, you might be right, in 3 years and saying, the reason we signed Kyle Lowry for 3 years is because after that third year, it'll be another Miami Heat, we're open for business, we'll tamper early, we'll bring you in, we'll take care of it that way kind of summer. So there is the possibility. That's why I thought if you're going to give PJ Tucker a third year, and you can incentivize it, you'll know if you're getting value then. You can say if he plays at least 60 games, 50 games, the year before that, it's a trigger. It becomes guaranteed because then you'll have a contributing player. So I think there is a way to work that to make it work. But yes, Clay, 2 years from now when Kyle comes off the books, that could be another summer of decision for the Heat. Pat Riley, God bless him, will be turning 80. Maybe there'll be a little bit different direction here. So maybe you have to consider it. This is the exact thing the Heat did not want to do with Jay Crowder, but this is also when the Heat had the vision of Giannis Antetokounmpo for that offseason. I don't think there is a clear vision this summer. This summer's free agency sucks. You know, I'm going to be out there with Big O in Vegas talking about a third-tier backup point guard. Ooh, this is juicy. But 2 years out, you can never predict because guys have so many option years and things of that sort. So it will be interesting to see where they draw the line. They drew the line with Jay Crowder. Probably was a mistake. We saw Phoenix get to the finals the year after. I'm not so sure that PJ is in the same stratosphere as Jay Crowder, where it become as difficult and as punishing, especially the timing in free agency, to do it this year and give him the full 3 years.
All right, we're getting some great questions, great comments in the chat. So I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to kind of go through these because this is I want to let this direct the show for a little bit because people are doing a really good job of this. So one of the questions, this is kind of a general question about all of the rumors that are out there, and what was asked is which ones have any sort of shred of believability with this thing. And so I'll pitch that to you and think about it for a second. I'll say one that over the last 48 hours I've kind of just shooed away. I think the Bradley Beal thing is done. Like that's not happening. And you listen to Mark Stein talk about it, and he's great, by the way. New York Times, one of the best NBA insiders there is. And the level of confidence in the Wizards organization that he's going to sign off on that $250 million is extremely high. Maybe next year, 2 years from now, we're doing the same song and dance. But we saw Bradley Beal at a Washington Mystics game wearing a Mystics jersey courtside a couple of weeks ago. He's not leaving Washington. That thing's not happening. I mean, I never say never, right? I'm saying never. That one's not happening.
I'll give you two factors there. They're saying that Bradley Beal is going to opt out. One, that lets him maximize the biggest contract, $250 million contract he can get from the Wizards, far more than an outside team in free agency. So on one hand, it would be a lot easier if he wanted to trade to say, I'm staying at this number. I could be traded before June 30th at this year's cap number, in case someone has an expiring contract. I could be traded also after July 1st at next year's cap numbers for your team, and we can make it work that way. That option apparently is off the table. Bradley Beal is going to opt out free agency. Much harder to make a deal in a sign and trade. So many more moving parts. You become hard cap. There's so many elements to that. But what a team that would trade for Bradley Beal would know then that they wouldn't know by trading for him in the final year of a contract is they could lock him in. That if he's going to sign a 5-year deal and then get traded, just like Kyle Lowry signed a 5-year deal, then got traded, just like Jimmy Butler signed his contract with the Sixers, then got traded in that initial sign and trade with the Heat, you would know that. So there still are those two factors in play that where some teams might have said, look, I am not giving up the farm for Bradley Beal for one more year. And the next summer, he's saying, I'm out of here anyway. So I could see how he plays it a little bit differently. But I do think the opt-out is just because he gets more money. It makes it harder to facilitate a trade. It limits the options that the Wizards would have and what they take back. So I think he's just one of those guys. At the end of the day, he's just comfortable. His wife is pregnant. He is where he is. I think when we list our names of Heat wish list, you know, the Jeremy Grants and the Damian Lillards and the Donovan Mitchell, we're probably moving Bradley Beal, who's probably been at number one, Clay, in the speculation range, probably down to number 8 or 10. Again, it's Pat Riley, so never say never. He got Jimmy Butler without cap space. He got Kyle Lowry because he maneuvered artfully around other teams. So I would never count him out, but less likely, yes, I agree with that.
And because he doesn't want to leave. I mean, that's basically, this isn't an asset thing. It's like and to be clear on this, to your point, next summer, you know, after he's, you know, he opted out this summer, then he'll be able to get the Supermax and lock it in, $250 million. Then maybe we're doing this thing again once he's under But I don't.
Yes. Your point the deal where he's not, where he's not happy and I made a mistake, but I got my money. But there's two kinds of players in the league. There's the kind of player who's just comfortable, like normal people, like us. You have a wife, you have a couple of kids, Clay. You just want to have your house. You don't want to tell your wife, hey, I got this great job offer in Tucson. We're out of here. We have to relocate the kids in school. There's that kind of player. And then there's player B like PJ Tucker. I'll go anywhere. I just want a title in Milwaukee. I'm going to Miami. I can get more money with Team X. I'm going to leave Team Y. So there's two different approaches and two different kind of players. And you know what, Clay? General managers know that in this league. They know players willing to always relocate and they know players who were just too comfortable. So I think Group A is the Bradley Beals. Got a family, got a wife, got kids, got a house. I'm comfortable. If we win, great. If we don't, hey, I've endured that for years anyway. Player B, PJ Tucker, mercenary. I am an NBA mercenary, and I will show up and fight your war for you if you're willing to pay the price and give me a championship-level roster, which the Sixers would be.
Yeah, for sure. And so that gets back to the point of competition, because somebody asked the question, will Pat Riley overpay to keep PJ Tucker? Overpaying to me is you would be bidding against nobody. You'd be bidding against yourself. In this case, I think it's pretty clear, unless Philly is just floating this out there to try to raise the price that Miami ends up paying, which I doubt is happening, you have competition. And look, I think a lot of teams do this when you have your championship window. You have to think about, all right, how do we get better right now? And then 2 years down the road, we don't know what things are going to look like. But to your point, Lowry's salary would be coming off the books. So to answer the question as far as would you overpay to keep PJ Tucker, maybe relative to what you thought you might have to pay 2 weeks ago, but not relative to what the rest of the league is going to pay. And this goes into another question that's been asked in the chat. Getting bigger. And I think that's kind of pointing at PJ Tucker, who's your starting four. And a couple of people made the comment about Rob Williams and how Rob Williams was such a problem for Miami in the playoffs. I would answer that with this. Rob Williams is a problem for everybody. And Rob Williams is a problem just as much as a weak side defender. There's not a whole lot that you can do relative to getting bigger to stop or slow down a dynamic weak side defender. You can't really change your team to stop a shot blocker who's going to come over, because there aren't a whole lot of Rob Williams in the NBA. I would argue he was the defensive player of the year when healthy. I think Bam Adebayo is right up there. I think those two may be the best defenders in the NBA. Bam Adebayo does a lot of what Rob Williams does defensively. You're not going to change your roster based on that, because he's kind of a unicorn. There aren't a whole lot of guys who can do what he can do. And I think what PJ Tucker offers your team, the ability to take up Trae Young 85 feet from the basket, the ability for your entire lineup to switch 1 through 5, I don't think you just get bigger for the sake of getting bigger when you have somebody. PJ Tucker the 4 spot isn't the spot that you need to look to upgrade on this team. And that's just the way I look at it.
And the way I look at it also is this. PJ Tucker, for most of the season, led the NBA in three-point percentage. What's the best way to get a big man out of the paint with the threat of the long ball? Now, maybe it's as simple as PJ Tucker stays, keeps shooting the corner threes, really, except for the playoffs, came down a little second half of the season. Get Bam Adebayo with that range. Well, all of a sudden, this year in the playoffs, it was Robert Williams, could camp in the paint or help in the paint on block to block because he knew that Bam wasn't going that far out. Remember how the Heat were eliminated 2 years ago or last year? Brook Lopez sat in the paint the entire time against the Heat, played drop coverage against Bam Adebayo, let him shoot that jumper. So what you really need to show is that you have a 4 and a 5 who can hit the outside shot. So for everyone, and I'm probably getting to this later in the show, you got to start your 7. You got to play Omer and Bam. You can if Omer can prove to be a high percentage three-point shooter, which he might be. And he did that in college a bunch also. That might work. Again, I know we're late against the break in this first segment, but maybe we'll come back after this and talk about Omer Yurtseven going to Summer League. That's why I thought, and I wrote about it at the Sun Sentinel today, those stories dovetailed. Possibly losing PJ Tucker, all of a sudden Omer Yurtseven's going to Summer League. If Omer Yurtseven can go to Summer League and show that he's a 42% three-point shooter and at least plant the seeds around the league, you got to go out to the arc with this guy. Then all of a sudden, if you play Omer next season, you do get another three-point PJ Tucker-like threat. Maybe you can play with Bam a little bit more. So I don't think those two things, PJ Tucker possibly leaving, Omer Yurtseven going to Summer League, are mutually exclusive. I think there's a reason Omer's going to Yurtseven. Going to Summer League. I think the Heat will try to play him with another big as much as possible to, 1, see if it works, but 2, show the league, hey, you better guard this guy in the perimeter. He's a three-point whiz. So I do think that could be a plan B, but I agree. As long as there's a Robert Williams, as long as there is a Brook Lopez, and someone who's willing to sit in the paint on Jimmy Butler driving, and your secondary scorers, you better show that your bigs can hit from outside. Maybe that's answered in the draft tonight with an outside shooting big man. That's a possibility also. But I do think Omer Yurtseven, to a degree, plays into this PJ Tucker thing.
A lot more to get to. Please keep dropping your questions. I love the question about what's real and what's not. I want to get into some of the names that we're hearing and whether or not this is realistic. That and a lot more coming up here on Inside the Paint.
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.